The alien vessel Nexus Drift hummed with the steady pulse of its quantum drives as Commander Lyra adjusted the makeshift sling across her chest, checking that her 3-month-old daughter was secure before entering the engineering bay. The Zealoty crew members she passed in the corridor pressed themselves against the walls, their crystalline eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. None spoke. They never did when she carried Emma like this. The engineering bay doors hissed open, revealing the towering warp core that stretched 3 decks high. Lyra moved to her station, fingers dancing across holographic displays while Emma gurgled contentedly against her chest. The Zealoty engineers watched from their posts, their scaled hands frozen mid-task. Kavar, the shift supervisor, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, returning to his console with deliberate focus. This silence had become routine since she'd returned to duty 6 weeks after giving birth. The memory of that day still burned bright in her mind, the Zealoty medical officer, Sarah, standing helplessly as human contractions racked her body, the alien's 6 fingers trembling as she tried to comprehend why Lyra refused sedation. Pain is part of it, Lyra had gasped between breaths. We endure because we must. Sarah had recorded everything with the dedication of a xenobiologist witnessing a miracle, though her expression suggested she was documenting something closer to controlled insanity. The recruitment process 8 months ago had been equally bewildering to them. When the interspecies exchange program selected her for the Nexus Drift, she was 4 months pregnant and showing the Zealoty delegation had stared at her rounded belly with barely concealed horror. You are ... compromised, Ambassador Rex had asked, his translator struggling with the concept. I'm pregnant, not dying, she'd replied, signing the contract without hesitation. Humans work until labor. Sometimes during. The silence that followed had been deafening. Now, as she recalibrated the plasma flow regulators with one hand, while gently bouncing Emma with her body's natural sway, that same silence enveloped the engineering bay. The Zealoty reproduced through external pods, their young developing in sterile chambers for 2 cycles before emerging fully conscious and mobile. The concept of carrying life internally, then caring for a helpless infant while maintaining professional duties, was as alien to them as their bioluminescent blood was to her. A soft alarm chimed from her console. The starboard thruster array was experiencing microfractures, nothing critical, but it needed attention. Lyra pulled up the diagnostic, cross-referenced it with the maintenance schedule, and initiated repair protocols, all while Emma began to fuss. Without missing a beat, she shifted the baby to her other arm, produced a bottle from her hip pouch, and continued typing one-handed as Emma latched onto the nipple. Behind her, she heard Steck whisper to his padmate in their clicking language. The translator in her ear rendered it clearly. She feeds her offspring, while preventing our deaths. How does her mind not fracture? His companion's response was barely audible. Perhaps it already has, and this is what human madness looks like. Lyra smiled without turning around. Let them wonder. 3 days ago, when the artificial gravity generators had fluctuated, causing half the crew to collapse from vertigo, she'd been the only one to reach the manual override. She'd crawled through the maintenance shaft with Emma strapped to her back, the baby's weight a familiar comfort as she'd navigated the zero-G environment. The Zealoty were stronger, faster, had better reflexes, but they'd never learned to function while carrying 30 pounds of squirming, crying life that depended entirely on them. The weeks following Emma's birth had established an unspoken protocol. The crew gave her wide berth, but she caught them watching, always watching. When she'd first returned to duty, Emma barely a month old, and still nursing every 2 hours, Chief Engineer Kex had suggested she take extended leave. I'll work, she'd said simply, fashioning a sling from emergency blankets. This is what humans do. He'd blinked all 4 eyes in sequencer, sign of complete bafflement, but hadn't argued. The breakthrough in their understanding came during the neutron star survey. A gravitational anomaly had sent Engineer Dran unconscious to the deck, his respiratory system failing in the pressure variance. While others scrambled for emergency protocols, Lyra had dropped to her knees beside him, Emma still strapped to her chest, and manually regulated his breathing with chest compressions adapted for Zealoty physiology. She'd learned their anatomy during pregnancy, studying between contractions, preparing for any emergency. Dren had lived. The security footage of her saving him while Emma slept peacefully against her chest had circulated through the ship within hours. Commander Kavara's voice broke through her reminiscence. The plasma manifold requires manual adjustment. Section 7. His tone was carefully neutral, but she caught the underlying question. Would she take Emma into the cramped, superheated maintenance tunnel? On it, she replied, already pulling on heat-resistant gloves one-handed. She checked Emma's temperature. The baby was cool, comfortable. The maintenance tunnel would be hot but not dangerous, and she'd done this before. As she approached the tunnel access, she noticed the entire engineering staff had stopped working, watching her with those unblinking crystalline eyes. The tunnel was as cramped as expected, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Emma made a small sound of protest as they entered the heat, but Lyra hummed low in her throat an old earth lullaby her mother had sung, something about mockingbirds and diamond rings. The plasma manifold glowed angry orange through the protective shielding. She reached a manual adjustment valve, braced herself against the tunnel wall, and began the delicate process of realignment. Halfway through, Emma began to cry. The sound echoed in the metal tunnel, tinny and distressed. Lyra's hands didn't waver. She continued the adjustment, muscle memory guiding her movements, while she shifted her weight to rock Emma gently. "Almost done, baby girl," she murmured. "Mama's almost done." The crying intensified. Still, her hands remained steady. This was nothing compared to fixing a broken air recycler, while Emma had colic at 3 weeks old, the baby screaming for 2 straight hours, while Lyra had prevented atmospheric contamination. She emerged from the tunnel 20 minutes later, sweat-soaked and triumphant. Emma had settled into hiccuping whimpers. The engineering bay was silent, except for the hum of properly functioning systems. Then, unprecedented, Kavar spoke directly to her. The offspring, ... It was in distress. How did you maintain precision? Lyra wiped sweat from her forehead, considering her answer. She was uncomfortable, not in danger. I knew the difference. A mother always knows. She paused, seeing genuine curiosity in his expression. Where I come from, women have worked while carrying children for thousands of years. In fields, in factories, in wars. We don't stop living because we're giving life. Malak, the youngest engineer, barely past his 3rd molting, stepped forward hesitantly. But ... Why? Why not rest? Why not separate the duties? Because, Lyra said, checking Emma's temperature again, satisfied she was cooling down. Human strength isn't just physical. It's mental, emotional. It's doing what must be done, regardless of circumstances. Emma doesn't make me weaker. She makes me stronger. Every challenge I overcome while carrying her proves I can overcome anything. The philosophical discussion might have continued, but the ship's primary alarm suddenly screamed through the bay. Red lights bathed everything in hellish tones. The main view screen erupted with data. They were passing too close to an unexpectedly active solar flare. Radiation levels spiked. The automated systems began failing in cascade. Radiation breach in sections 4 through 7. Kex's voice cracked with panic. Manual shutdown required, or we lose the entire stern. The crew erupted into motion, but the Zealothy's weakness became immediately apparent. They were more susceptible to radiation than humans. Already, 2 engineers had collapsed, their scales flickering with distress patterns. The path to the manual shutdown required passing through the compromised sections. Lyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed an emergency radiation suit, modified it hastily to accommodate Emma's sling, and sealed them both inside. The suit was designed for one occupant. It would be hot, cramped, and Emma would hate every second, but it would keep her safe. "Commander, you cannot," Kex started. "I'm the only one who can," she cut him off, already moving toward the breach zone. "Monitor my vitals. If I pass out, send the emergency drones." The compromised sections were a nightmare of sparking panels and radiation warnings. Emma began crying immediately, the suit's confined space and her mother's rapid movements distressing her. Lyra pushed forward, following the memorized path to the manual shutdown. Her heads-up display showed radiation levels that would incapacitate a Zealothy in seconds. For a human, she had minutes. The shutdown console was behind a panel that required manual removal bolts, each one fighting her as the ship's structural integrity fluctuated. Emma's cries had become screams, the sound filling the suit, filling her head. Her hands shook not from the radiation, not from fear, but from the primal need to comfort her child. She forced herself to continue. 3 bolts, 7, 10. Emma's screams reached a pitch that triggered every maternal instinct to stop, hold, comfort. 11 bolts, 12. The panel crashed away, revealing the manual controls. Her fingers flew across the sequences, years of training overriding the sound of her daughter's distress. The radiation alarms began dropping, one sector at a time. Safe, safe, safe. She ran back through the sections, Emma's cries diminishing to exhausted whimpers. By the time she reached the engineering bay and tore off the suit's helmet, the baby was silent, trembling against her chest. The entire Zealoty crew stood frozen, watching as she extracted Emma from the suit, checked her thoroughly, then held her close, murmuring apologies and reassurances. Sarah, the medical officer, had appeared with a scanner. You subjected yourself and your offspring to lethal radiation levels. Controlled exposure, Lyra corrected, allowing Sarah to scan them both. The suit protected her. She was never in real danger, just discomfort. But if I hadn't acted, we'd all be dead. You chose correctly, Keck said slowly, his 4 eyes fixed on Emma, who was now peacefully nursing, oblivious to the chaos she'd just endured. But the sound of her distress, how did you continue? Lyra looked around at the assembled crew, these beings who had never known the weight of a crying infant at 3 in the morning. The exhaustion of endless nights, the constant calculation of risk versus necessity that came with parenthood. Because that's what mothers do, she said simply. We function through the crying, through the exhaustion, through the fear, not in spite of our children, but because of them. Emma's cries didn't weaken my resolve, they strengthened it. Every scream reminded me that she needed me to succeed. Over the following days, something shifted in the crew's dynamic. Valen from navigation brought her a heating pad designed for Zealoty egg chambers, modified to warm bottles. Engineer Dran, whom she'd saved during the gravity failure, constructed a reinforced carrier that could withstand ship-wide emergencies while keeping Emma visible and accessible. Even Kavar, eternally professional, had begun timing his engineering reports to avoid Emma's nap schedule. The transformation was complete when Captain Zeris called her to the bridge during the next crisis in negotiation with aggressive Corvani traders. We need someone who can think under pressure, he'd said. His scales, rippling with what she'd learned, was respect. Someone who has proven that no amount of chaos can break their focus. She'd stood on the bridge, Emma sleeping in the carrier Dran had made, and negotiated a trade agreement while the baby dozed against her chest. The Corvani, it turned out, respected strength in all forms. The sight of a warrior mother, as they called her, conducting diplomacy while nurturing young, had impressed them more than any show of military force. Now, weeks later, as she took her shift at the auxiliary command station, a position typically reserved for senior Zealoty officers, none questioned her presence. Emma cooed from her secured carrier, tiny hands grasping at holographic displays that danced just out of reach. The crew moved around them with practiced ease, no longer seeing an oddity, but recognizing something they'd never expected to find in the vast darkness between stars, proof that strength came in forms they'd never imagined. Commander Zix approached during a quiet moment, bearing a small device. For the young one, he said, his formal tone softened. It will translate her sounds into baseline frequencies we can understand. Not language, but emotional resonance. So we might know when she truly needs intervention versus when she is. Simply expressing. Lyra accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. You're learning, she said. We are trying to understand, Zix corrected, then paused. Your species carries its future literally upon its backs while building its present. We separated these functions for efficiency. But watching you, Commander, perhaps efficiency and strength are not synonymous. As the shift continued, Lyra worked her stations while Emma played with the translator, her baby sounds now creating small light patterns that the Zealoty could interpret. When Emma laughed a bright, bubbling sound, the patterns danced gold across the bridge's displays. The entire crew paused, watching the golden lights with something approaching wonder. That is happiness, Steck asked softly. Pure happiness, Lyra confirmed, adjusting a navigation calculation without looking away from her work. No fear, no want, no understanding of danger or death, just joy at existence. And you protect that while protecting us, Captain Zeris observed from his command chair. Perhaps this is why humans, despite being among the youngest spacefaring species, adapt so quickly. You never stopped being protectors of your young, even as you reached for the stars. Emma reached for a holographic star chart, her chubby fingers passing through the light. Several crew members watched, and for the first time, Lyra heard the Zealothy equivalent of gentle laughter, harmonious humming that filled the bridge. She reaches for stars she cannot grasp, Valen noted, yet shows no frustration at failure. She doesn't know it's impossible, Lyra replied, saving her work and lifting Emma for their break. And maybe that's humanity's greatest strength. We carry our impossible dreams with us, literally and figuratively, refusing to accept that anything is beyond our reach. As she left the bridge for Emma's feeding, she heard Captain Zeris address the crew. Let it be noted in the ship's log. Human strength is not measured in physical capacity alone, but in their ability to bear life's weight while reaching for the stars. We would do well to remember this. The corridor outside was quiet, but it was a different silence than before, not the silence of confusion or fear, but of respect. Emma babbled happily, the translator creating swirls of contented blue light that danced along the walls. Mother and child moved through the ship that had become their home, proof that strength took many forms, and sometimes the smallest cargo carried the greatest weight.